got a really good panel up today. This is made up of local governments, special purpose districts, contractor. So you're going to hear about reuse, and the only reason I get to facilitate because our organization has reuse in its name. So, and Seth and Kara made me do it. So that's the only reason I'm up here. But I like quotes. We do a newsletter. I have a lot of quotes. So I'm going to invoke the great late senator from South Carolina, Strom Thurmond. And this is the thing, so you young folks, there's something called Google, so you can Google it. But I'm going to ask the panel to please speak into the machine. So I think that was one of the Watergates or whatever meetings. So the panel, if you're in the back of the room like I have been, we sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. Those that are of that age that know what Charlie Brown's teacher sounds like. So pull the microphone close, speak into it, and speak out to the audience. Not that I don't care what you say, but don't refer it to me. Let's project out and move forward with that. So we do have different organizations up here, and I hope the audience and I hope DOE comes away with how many organizations work within the economic development reuse arena. And I am not going to introduce them because each one of them are going to have 8 minutes or so to do a presentation, if that's what they have, introduce themselves, talk about their site and what it's doing in the reuse arena. And Diane, I'm going to start with you, since you're on that side. So I think they agreed to sit and move ahead. So do we have a clicker? Right here. There we go. That's yours.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you and good morning. I would like to just start off saying thank you to Brian Vance and thank you to ECA for hosting this meeting today. But I want to thank Brian Vance for his comments earlier. We do really appreciate the monthly updates. It is critical for us as local governments to know what's going on. It helps ease our community. It helps ease our staff and the work that they do every day. So my name is Diane Howard. I am the Executive Director for the Port of Benton. I also get the privilege of sitting on the Hanford Communities along with our county and our city governments. Also a member of ECA, the only port I believe that's a member of ECA. And then I have the privilege of serving on the EMAP board along with many colleagues that are here in the audience today. So I've been, and I'm also a born and raised Tri-Citian. So I have been doing economic development for my entire career. Previous to the port, I was actually at the city of Richland. So I'd like to just kind of start with some opening comments and some overview of the Port of Benton. I'll give some background, but I want to say this is my first time at this conference, and it's really exciting to hear the momentum and hear about the progress. And I just want to thank all of our contractors and all of our workforce and tradespeople for what they're doing, because when I hear comments from Ike like clearing the decks, building on momentum, common purpose, and helping creating enduring economic development, economic growth, for me as an economic development practitioner, that is exciting. So for me, when times are good, that's when I need to work the hardest, because that way when things shift, there's a little bit softer landing. So let's talk about special purpose districts in the state of Washington and ports. Okay, glasses on. So in Washington state, port districts were authorized in 1911 really to spur economic development. Today there's actually 75 port districts in the state, including the Port of Benton. We are special purpose districts. We have limited purpose local governments. We're separate from a city, town, or county government. Washington is actually unlike other states. Each port has a board of locally elected commissioners, and in my case, I have 3 of them. We are really authorized under state statute to provide a limited number of functions. Our primary focus is trade, economic development, and to support our local communities and tourism. We also have taxing authority and industrial development bonding authority. The Port of Benton itself was established after the creation of the city of Richland in 1958. It was transferred in ownership of the town from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Atomic Energy Commission. So the citizens of Richland actually created the port specifically to be the reuse entity for economic development purposes and economic diversification. The property that was originally transferred to the Port of Benton's district was 290 acres known as Camp Hanford as part of the Manhattan Project. And in 1961, we received the Civil Air Patrol, which is now known as the Richland Airport and serves our general aviation community. As a port district overall, we've got 27 acres across 12 development site areas, and our port district covers 2/3 of Benton County, including North Richland, where the Hanford site is located. Some will ask, well, what happened to the rest of the county? What happened was actually the Port of Kennewick was created prior to the Port of Benton, and they did not want the city of Richland as it got incorporated. They weren't sure quite what it had to offer yet because it had been a secret for so long. So, you know, that's why the city of Richland and its citizens went ahead and made their own port district, by golly. And to date, we've got $90 million in assets. We own over 50 buildings, of which probably about 20 of them are multi-tenant or single-tenant use. We actually have 2 general aviation airports, one in Richland and another one in Prosser. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later. A rail line, more than 1,000 acres of available industrial land, barge slip and high dock that's primarily used by the Navy and will be offloading actually this weekend as well, decommissioned nuclear compartments for long-term storage out at the Hanford site. So let's talk about some port investments. The port's really been active in acquiring and developing Hanford lands and buildings that the Department of Energy's declared surplus. In 1996, the Port of Benton became the first port in the nation to acquire surplus government property under the United States Maritime Administration Property Conveyance Program, authorized in the 1994 Defense Authorization Act. We received the former Hanford 3000 area, which consisted of 71 acres and 120,000 square feet of building space for light industrial use, which is now known as the Richland Innovation Center. Other former Department of Energy land transferred to the port was a 786-acre site, along with 16 miles of rail line and equipment that is served by both Class I railroads and formerly known as the Hanford's 1100 area. The Port of Benton made about $2.4 million investment in an upgrade of critical infrastructure to bring that property up to city codes and attract light industrial and commercial businesses. That property is now known as the Port's Richland Business Park and home to 14 companies. So quick side note, nothing is free. We have to convert everything to city codes and city standards, and that takes us quite a bit of time. I will tell you that was a very heavy lift for the Port of Benton, but we're really pleased with where it's gone and how we're moving forward on that project and property. Overall, though, the Port of Benton really works along with our community on industrial sectors, primarily clean energy, advanced manufacturing, high-tech research and development and transportation, logistics, as well as agribusiness. Within our district and our sites, our tenants produce nearly 400 million in goods and services annually, and the companies in our development areas employ more than 10,000 people and generate millions in revenue each year. And I get the fun part of being a port district is I get to dabble in a little bit of R&D stuff with the lab across the street and the university to the south. Then I go to Prosser and the other areas, and it's just woe is me, because then I get to also dabble and work with our wine industry and value-added ag, and maybe help Kara understand how to make a good spodie. So more on that later. So I'd also. The Port of Benton has really been working with our industry and our community partners as we continue to focus on the future. And we've got 140 members as part of the Washington Vertical Cluster. This is bringing together academia, industry, our capital investors and funders, government, our city and our local utilities, as well as TRIDEC, who is our community reuse organization. And in 2021, the Port of Benton received a grant through the Washington State Department of Commerce The Vertical Innovation Cluster was established to accelerate and transition a carbon-free energy production sources by 2025. And this is in alignment with the State of Washington's Clean Energy Transformation Act. And the significance of this is that that is the statement from a press release from the Department of Commerce. Advanced nuclear power technologies. Go Washington. So our key initiatives are to support the implementation of advanced nuclear power technologies and also create the first U.S.-based and industry-led clean energy supplier alliance. So in partnership with the Tri-Cities Local Business Association, we've supported the establishment of a nonprofit clean energy supplier alliance this year that has brought together businesses and labor using a proven international cluster model to address clean energy supply chain gaps, foster innovation to accelerate the deployment of the next generation of nuclear. And many of our founding members are here today. I know Patricia's here from Hikari Ascent, John's here from Tetra Tech. We've also got Babcock Services, Fluid Controls and Components, Fluor, Framatome, Highline Engineering, and Sargent & Lunding as the key founding members of that Clean Energy Supplier Alliance. We're also focused on highlighting the deployment of advanced nuclear projects. There are 4 advanced nuclear power projects with a presence and support from the Tri-Cities. That includes TerraPower, NuScale, Ultra Safe Nuclear, and of course, X-Energy. I'm almost there, Rick. Our most recent transfer of Hanford site land began in 2010 using the 10 CFR 770 process. I know many of you are probably familiar with that and understand its complexity. It is difficult, it is a long journey, and we ultimately needed congressional action in 2015 to get it across the finish line. Today, that 1,641-acre site is part of the North Horn Rapids area, and it is jointly owned by the Port of Benton and the City of Richland, and then Energy Northwest has the 300-acre portion of it. That site is where we currently have a 740-acre, 200-megawatt solar project known as Ruby Flats that is planned to begin construction in 2023. There is also 2 major prospects looking at the site, one industrial related and the other advanced manufacturing related. And regionally, we generate over 87% sustainably sourced clean energy in the Tri-Cities community already. We are the place to deploy advanced clean energy technologies. We want to move forward from clean up to clean jobs. This no longer requires us waiting. We've had the opportunity to move forward as a community and continued reuse requests in alignment with the Hanford's comprehensive land use plan that involves all stakeholders. These sites, our site, can support all levels of energy demands, and we need support from the Department of Energy to begin our stakeholder planning and engagement process. And here's what we need to make this a reality. First, we need to support cleanup of the environmental management sites. We really want cleanup to happen, and we really do appreciate the work, again, of our local team and contractors that are here today. It would really help to move the reuse authority probably under a different Department of Energy office with sufficient budget that follows the long-standing comprehensive land use plan that involved all of our stakeholders. So it doesn't compete with the priority as cleanup, but complements the cleanup efforts. Second, we need additional electricity capacity. Currently, we are limited. We can't recruit new companies because of transmission and load restrictions, and our local utilities cannot take on the upfront cost on their own. So it's exciting to see the support for advanced reactors in the Inflation Reduction Act. And this could really open up some opportunities for power purchase agreements to be considered by PNNL or even VIPPlant, for example, to allow for our region to increase its electrical capacity and meet our State of Washington, again, Clean Energy Transformation Act goals and regional net zero goals. But these power purchase agreements would need to be longer than 10 years in time. These actions really would help us realize our community vision that was created since our inception, reset again in the early 90s, and now re-envisioned yet again to create the largest most integrated, advanced clean energy manufacturing park and be the model for the nation to help meet state and national climate goals. The Tri-Cities is well positioned. We just need to continue to coordinate, collaborate, and get to net zero. And to be an example for how this can be done as we drive innovation and accelerate deployment of advanced clean energy solutions. By retaining industrial jobs and provides equitable growth and access to a wide range of educational backgrounds, and it really does set a baseline for your community from an economic development purpose because the multipliers that industrial sector provides to your regional and your economic, your region's economic health. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and we'll move right through the table here.
Big green button. Okay.
Big green button.
Okay, thank you, Rick, and thank you to everyone organizing this and inviting me to come here today to speak about reuse opportunities in Los Alamos. And so I just have to start with something off script first because Mr. Michelanis showed a photo. His photo was of a bear. And I think some folks here have heard about a thing called Facebook, maybe. Well, there's one of the Facebook pages in Los Alamos. They have local information, and people post about, well, I saw a bear at 45th and Urban Street this morning, and it was be watching out. But I think the thing that got everyone's attention a few weeks ago was when there was a photo posted of a mountain lion carrying off a juvenile deer. There's all different kinds of wildlife in Los Alamos. So I'm Randall Ridey. I'm the chair of the Los Alamos County Council. And again, pleased to be here to talk about reuse in Los Alamos. Just to give you a little bit of background about Los Alamos. So I think the thing that I wanted to highlight today really was that Los Alamos is land limited. So we're by far the smallest county in New Mexico, by about a factor of 10 smaller than the next smallest county. Our population is closer to the middle of the counties, so we actually have a fairly high population density. And another interesting thing about Los Alamos, with all the discussion about wildlife, might not be surprising, there's a lot of federal land. And so people might guess the wrong largest federal landowner in the county, but it's actually not the Department of Energy, it's the Department of Agriculture. It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has Forest Service has the most land. So about over 80% of the land is federally owned, and so there's very limited land left then for private development. And the other thing about it is we heard about different communities having no flat land, so there's a lot of canyons in Los Alamos, and so there's not a lot of flat land either for development. So there's been land transfers dating back from the late 90s, and this was through a public law, specifically was started by Senator Domenici at the time. And a lot of land has been transferred through that public law. There's still some land that's left to be transferred. And so I just want to highlight a couple of the areas. So we have a location that's near the town site in Los Alamos on DP Road. And that's one of the transfer areas I'll talk about in a second. And then the other one is down near White Rock, so the other kind of community. The other interesting thing about Los Alamos is that it's an incorporated county. There's no city government. It's all one county government. So here's one of the projects that's actually been recently completed. So starting back, the before slide is just the open space that was a former fuel farm, and that got developed into an affordable housing project that you see over on the other side. And so those apartments have actually been occupied starting about beginning of this year. So that's a successful land transfer that was a cleanup project. And there's some apartments that are going to be put in across the street from there. That's also in another former EM area land transfer. And these are going to be completed sometime, early next year, most likely. They're actually a little bit further along than these slides show. And another project, so this is near White Rock. One of the parcel names was A19. And so this one was one that took many years, so there's a lot of complications that occurred sort of during the Great Recession was one of the attempts to try to do this. That was an economic issue, sort of nationally, making the development difficult. But it was successfully developed starting just before the pandemic, and people have been moving in there. So eventually it'll be around about 200 homes here and some mixed-use development in this project. And so that was all I had for my slides.
Just pass it down.
I do not have any slides. My name is Jennifer Chandler, and I am the administrator for the Village of Piketon. Piketon is the frontline community for the U.S. DOE Portsmouth site. I'm also the president of the Scioto Valley Piketon Area Council of Governments. And I've been involved with the DOE site one way or another for my entire career. I started out at the site as an intern doing environmental management activities, and kind of bounced back and forth between working for the community reuse organization and then going back to the site and then back to economic development. Like, I can't make up my mind, right? So, because there's just so much going on, and it's so much fun, and there are so many different pieces and parts to reuse. And what's different about the Portsmouth site from the other sites is probably our size. We're 3,700 acres, very rural, and we are largely EM. We have a little bit of other activities going on at the site, but mostly EM. So reusing property and big reuse projects are really they're not available yet. So there's just been a lot of planning and talking, and a few land transfers and a few activities that have started at the site, but those reuse end users and things of that nature, everybody's still really just trying to figure that out. Who can come onto the property and operate in the middle of the other activities. So, as the Scioto Valley Piketon Area Council of Governments, which is a very new organization, we created that so that the frontline communities, the different local governments within the frontline community, can be united and work together on moving the community itself forward. And so the things that we are focused on primarily are making sure that we are ready for whatever end user the community reuse organization is able to bring to the site. So this is like a reuse panel, and the organization that I work for, and also the village, obviously we are not trying to get property from the Department of Energy, but instead we are preparing our public utilities to support the DOE site, because in our case, large sites, you have all the infrastructure is there and you're upgrading your infrastructure. Well, we're tearing ours out. And so there's still some discussion going on about that. Some people like that, some people don't like that. I like that, that the Dinosaur water treatment plant and the Dinosaur wastewater treatment plant are potentially coming out, because I'm building 2 brand new plants in the next 18 months for the Village of Piketon. And we have kept that in mind as we progress through our design of both of those plants, that we may be the provider of utilities for the end users that the community reuse organization might bring into the site. So, now the way we have structured our projects with our utility expansions, we are not relying on DOE to be our end user. So we've, like for example, our water plant, we are building the structure to be large enough so that we can do modular expansions in case we provide the facility with municipal, water. So, we're trying to keep all of that in mind. And what we hope is, on the flip side, that DOE is also keeping the things that the community wants to see happen in mind as they do their planning. And that was one of the questions when preparing for this panel is, how can DOE and their cleanup plans, what can be done with their cleanup planning to help promote the vision of the community. So, we are trying to do our part as best we can to support redevelopment. We obviously well, it's not obvious to you guys, it's obvious to me because I live in the middle of it, but, you know, we never wanted the facility to go through D&D and then be turned into some kind of a park or nature preserve. We, since I began my career, the community has always wanted something new to come in. And we've duked it out over the years. I've got a lot of battle scars related to the land transfer process, which I don't recommend. It's terrible. It takes forever, and then things change. But so because I can't tolerate that kind of stuff, I move over to something that I can tolerate and control, and that is upgrading the Village of Piketon's capacity, working on things that might help our education system prepare a workforce that could work at the site, instead of trying to get DOE to do this and DOE to do that, and pay for my workforce development program. Not that anybody's doing that. I don't mean to imply that we're not doing it and everybody else is getting it. But my point is that we're trying to understand like what it is about the development and reuse process that we can actually control. And I've heard over the years that there is no future mission for the Portsmouth site. So that makes it really difficult sometimes when you have a reuse discussion with the department, because some people that have that discussion think that the department is going to bring a new mission in. And we hope that that would happen, maybe NE brings something in, who knows. But we are, rolling up our sleeves and getting down and dirty in the local supporting community to make sure that we have the infrastructure and the workforce development pipeline to support whatever end user might come to Piketon to do business. And so we are we've had some opportunities come our way as a local government related to renewable power. So, we have an investor that wants to do solar panels, and it's a big, long process. If you've ever, when you start it, it's several years before anything really materializes, but you do have to do some work ahead of time. So, we're moving forward with establishing a municipal utility district so that we can, be part of the solar panel project, and working with the solar developer. The first discussion was, well, maybe we can get DOE property and put solar panels on it. And, of course I'm saying, no, please no, because I don't want to have to go through that property transfer process. It's terrible. Let's look at the properties around the facility. We have the ability, with our facility being so small, we have some really great assets that are just outside of the DOE property boundary, and so we're focusing on that. The national grid, it's incredible that everything that comes in to that area. So with our solar project, we're preparing ourselves for municipal utility district. We, of course, want a power purchase agreement with DOE maybe. If the site wants to run on renewable power, has a goal to do that, we potentially have the ability to do that, to support that effort. And then for the solar panel arrays, we're looking at where would they go. We don't want to put solar panel arrays on developable property. We want to put it on property that, there's really anything better you can do with it. And in our case, again, I don't want to do that property transfer process because it's terrible. I can't tolerate it. I know it's necessary, and you guys are doing it at the big sites, and it's working slow but sure. But we're looking at the area adjacent to the site as a way to create buffer in between the waste and the community. And so it's just things like that, like what we're doing at our site and with our particular situation is just trying to improve our ability to support whatever the community reuse organization is able to bring into the area as an end user. That's really all I want to bore you guys with at this point, and we can move on to the next presentation and then hopefully go into some questions. But thank you.
Okay, Okay, thanks. So Ken Ruder, I'm Chief Executive and President of UCOR, and while they put up I have a few kind of slides to frame things up. I was reflecting on City Councilman Hope's comments yesterday, and then Seth brought him up again this morning, and I'm thinking that this was like a Reagan moment for me, you know, President Reagan moment, you know, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall kind of thing. So this wasn't staged by any means, but I'm here to kind of respond to actually the comments with regard to the cleanup was not the end at the East Tennessee Technology Park, but actually the beginning of a bright economic development and future with regard to that. And so it's interesting to me because I appreciate the comments that were made yesterday and this morning, because to me it's reflective of how well we're zippered together as a set of partners and a set of stakeholders, ultimately with this recognition that environmental cleanup, as it relates to carrying out Superfund work, that really is the start that enables a very bright economic future, and what's critical to all that is integrated with the end in mind, and so and we'll use the East Tennessee Technology Park, now called the Heritage Center Private Sector Industrial Park, as an example here of how that critical integration as it relates to the inception of the facility and its operational state, and the fact that its support of the Manhattan Project, the ending of the Great War, the winning of the Cold War. So there's my Reagan-Gorbachev piece, and then carrying out one of the largest environmental cleanups in the history of this country, and then to the commissioner or to the councilman's point and to Seth's point this morning, that it didn't end there. And then the implementation of a full-scale master plan for brownfield redevelopment, again under the 10 CFR 770 process, if you're familiar with it, not to bore you with acronyms, the Circle of 120H process, and a DOE Order 458.1, all of those working in partnership under a Pathway to End States framework to deliver these outcomes. And building on yesterday's points that Laura and I made, which was that this is an enabling action to produce these outcomes or these end states, and that they're more than just cleanup. It's just not solely finishing this cleanup mission and then putting a fence around this very valuable property from many different perspectives and lenses, and saying, okay, that's done. And so this is an example of how this integration from the inception of the site to meeting our moral and ethical obligation to reduce the environmental liability of that site, completing the circle, and then ultimately the revitalization and reindustrialization of the site. And yesterday I talked about a number of federal land reuse concepts that are taking place at the Y-12 National Defense Complex and the Oak Ridge National Lab National Science Complex. This is an example of true greenfield and brownfield redevelopment. So this is more of a commercial lens with regard to that. And so, to provide a kind of a bigger picture perspective on what that looks like, there's three fundamental end states that are associated to this site. One attributable to a private sector industrial park and commercialization or re-commercialization. The next is in the form of conservation, natural asset enablement, and reuse. And then the third one is historic preservation and recognition. Ultimately, this reflects roughly 5,000 plus acres that have been remediated and put back in the hands of the citizens of East Tennessee or the state of Tennessee or the southeastern United States. The real key for me is that that's essentially at the core of what is environmental justice. The returning of these lands that were provided in the best interest of our nation for many, many purposes, most importantly ending the Great War and winning the Cold War, and now being brought back to them for economic development and economic opportunity and prosperity from those three end states. So as it relates to the multi-use industrial park end state, we welcome and invite all of you to come by and take a look, but the nuclear renaissance of this country is happening in East Tennessee. Just to the west side of the city of Oak Ridge. You can see a number of the businesses are there. We've had two large nuclear fuels research and manufacturing companies decide to site there. We've got two large SMR, small modular reactor projects there, the Kairos Power demonstration and test facility, and then most recently the announcement by the Tennessee Valley Authority in partnership with GE and Hitachi to build a 300 megawatt small modular reactor project at the former Clinch River site. So this represents probably initially a roughly $500 million in investment and approximately 1,500 new jobs. The other key part as it relates to environmental cleanup, essentially roughly 15 or 20 years ago, there was over 100 acres under roof of buildings, gaseous diffusion plants out there, a number of ancillary facilities, contaminated soil, so forth and so on. Thus the reason to carry out the environmental cleanup, and all that's gone now, and that's enabled this outcome. And in alignment with what was believed to be the timing and the opportunity that would be presenting itself. And thus an alignment over 10 plus years to get to this point from a private sector industrial park standpoint. This has all been worked in partnership with the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee, certainly the state of Tennessee, the federal government, to align all these to get to this end state. And the way we do that is through what's called a pathway to end state process. Next is probably one of my more favorite areas personally, which is conservation and green space. So essentially 3,500 acres have been turned over to the state of Tennessee for exactly these types of uses: natural asset, conservation, green space, working in partnership with the city of Oak Ridge, working in partnership with Roane County. Already a number of sponsored events that take place for community purposes in this area. Very highly used area now, and to me, kind of right in the center of getting this land back in the hands of the citizens who lent it to all of us to go carry our mission out, and now them enjoying it once again as part of their community. Third end state, as it relates to the former K-25 site, is really the National Historic Preservation. So this is a partnership between the Department of Energy and Department of Interior, because this is where the 409th National Park, as it relates to East Tennessee, is being sited. Of course, there's a facet of that in Los Alamos and a facet of that at Hanford and Richland, Washington. And so all of those sites work together to represent the 409th National Park of our country, along with the responsibilities that the government has for historic preservation and recognition. We've recently opened up, as part of that start of that process, the K-25 History Center. It's offered both in a physical sense and in a virtual sense for those already. I'm very encouraged when I go out there now to see the number of visitors. I recently saw that the parking lot was so full, all the folks that were coming with, their RVs and towing their cars, they're parking in the secondary parking lot. You see license plates, Arizona, Illinois, Iowa, Washington State. So you see people using the national park. And that is a great sign to us, to me individually, that with regard to how well this reuse program's working and how valuable this end state is, not only just to the state, but broader than that. And it preserves all 75 years of the history of gaseous diffusion, what it meant for our national defense needs, what it means for nuclear energy. All of that's represented in this History Center. So I invite you to come and see that. We're going to be finishing up the other pieces of the national park by 2024, working in partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers. It's just a great step forward on how all the agencies of this great country are coming together to preserve this history and make it available to all of us. So back to Chuck and Seth's points over the last 2 days. What does it all mean from an economic standpoint and for the region? And what we're seeing in East Tennessee is that by effectively integrating end states into the environmental cleanup program, ultimately to meet the moral and ethical and legal obligation of environmental liability reduction for all the American taxpayers, because we all hold that liability, and use that to enable federal land reuse and commercialization, really does maximize and optimize economic growth. And so just to there's a little in the green tagline there. In 2017, the GDP for associated or attributable to the overall Oak Ridge Reservation, which includes the land I just talked about, was roughly $5.6 billion annually, represented roughly 25,000 full-time equivalent jobs. 2019, we took another look at that. It's now 7.2 billion. 1.3 billion of that is environmental cleanup as an industry and its enablement of this economic growth and this development through the Pathway to End States process, through the 10 CFR 770 process, with a strong number of indicators between the federal land reuse and the new national programs that will be coming to Oak Ridge National Lab in Y12, along with the nuclear renaissance of this country happening at the former East Tennessee Technology Park. You're looking at probably a GDP of near $9 billion, essentially enabled through this 38,000 acre set of property. On a per capita basis, to me, it's just absolutely amazing if you look at it from commercial terms or industrial growth or commercial development. It's just really could not be a better story. And all of that was enabled by integrating the cleanup program with the reindustrialization, with the reuse, through the community reuse organization, through our state partners and our federal partners across multiple agencies, all through as Laura talked about earlier today, all through this integrated partnership, producing these common outcomes. And what I'll finish with is that it's kind of consistent with what I discussed yesterday. When you implement shared governance and bring all the parties together at the table, what you find is then you all experience mutual equity growth together because of that common inclusion. And that's what this is producing. Thousands of people's pathway to the middle classes and being enabled through this economic development. And no better way to do it than meeting our moral and ethical obligation to clean up the environment, based on our history. So appreciated the opportunity to have a bit of a discussion about it, and I'm sure Rick's got a bunch of questions for us.
Well, I got a bunch, but we don't have a bunch of time. But appreciate the panel. As you can see, we could have a 2-day, 3-day conference just related to this topic of reuse and economic development. But I do have some questions, and I'm sure it's going to surprise the audience. these are just right off the cuff. The panel has not planned any of these questions, so I'm sure they're going to be shocked when I ask them, but Diane actually had some of this. So it is a DOE conference, so, and the answer to this may be yes and no. Is DOE appropriately considering reuse options or the potential in cleanup planning? If they're not, how could this be improved? And if they are, what examples? And I'm going to let you expound upon some that you mentioned in your talk, but let's let Randall and go down that table to see what response you may have to that spontaneous question.
Go first?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Yeah, so actually it was interesting. So just following the site manager, so Mr. Michelanis talked about the planning project, strategic planning project process that they're starting for the site. And so I think that's one thing that we're looking forward to, is the opportunity to get that process engaged. And so I think that will help with identifying, those opportunities for reuse that are out there. As I kind of alluded to in my presentation, there are some properties that are still remaining under the public law that has been on the books for a number of years now. And so those are opportunities. At this point, they're actually one of the more complex sites is included within that area. So in Technical Area 21, so that's not one that we're looking forward to seeing anytime soon. Another one is a canyon area, so that's probably got some limited kind of reuse potential, but it does have potential for some of the things that heard about in terms of, recreational opportunities potentially. So there are some opportunities there. I think I think that there are areas that we can certainly see for improvement. We've had discussions, and we also have the complications. So we have, EM, but we also have NNSA. So it's mainly an NNSA site, and they're the land owners. And so it's working collaboratively with those two groups as well. So that's another thing that the county has been starting to do that. So we have a working group that's trying to look at other lands that might be available that are outside of that list. And we had actually a 770 request from 2019 that was turned down. And so I appreciate the comment about it's something to be avoided, I think, was the comment. So yeah, I think that's.
Jennifer?
I'm only going to speak from experience, and my experience with the Portsmouth site goes all the way back to 1999 with the Community Reuse Organization. And at that time, we were a crow for a site that didn't have any land available, right? Because they were operating. So we came in as a crow pretty early in our process. But we did put together a lot of documents, and in particular, the community transition plan that we used to spend the DOE money that we received as a crow. And so at that time, one of our projects that was really important from a reuse standpoint, because everybody knows that your end user, or the type of end user that you want, is dependent upon certain pieces of infrastructure being available. And so at that time, we're looking at 3,700 acres, and the operations are taking place inside a perimeter road, about 1,200 acres, and then the rest of the acreage is outside of perimeter road, but still in lands owned by the department. Some of it was landfill space, but on the north part of the site, we had the two Class 1 railroads that came in and served the site. And they came in on property not owned by either railroad, so that's called the common use tract, and that's a really great competitive edge that you can have as a community when you're able to use that infrastructure to your advantage. And so during the development of our community transition plan, and in particular how we at that time wanted the site to look like after uranium enrichment stopped, we had identified that area for intermodal. And again, like that's been in the plans and funded actually by the Department of Energy, since 1999. And, I've heard some discussion about partnerships with other agencies. As, working for the Crow, I would take the DOE money, and then I would go and apply for money from other programs, and, we were able to turn the money we had from DOE, tripled that amount, to do projects all over the region. But with this one, we had the Appalachian Regional Commission had given us some money to do some intermodal feasibility studies, and it turns out it was feasible, and so we're moving forward with this. But when the cleanup started in 2010, it seemed like nobody really knew what the end-use plan was for the site, and that's frustrating when you spend many years developing that, and in fact, multiple versions of a reuse plan or what your idea is. So, what ultimately happened with the site that we had identified for our intermodal, which we believed and, was a tremendous asset that, certain types of end users would really benefit from. It would actually attract people to the Piketon area to put their business either on the DOE property after it was cleaned up, or even next to it, because this is on the edge of the property owned by DOE. But that's the site of our new on-site disposal cell. So it, in my opinion, as, in economic development, the one parcel on the entire DOE site in Piketon, it was the easiest to transfer. We actually went through the transfer process for 18 months, and then we're told we couldn't get it transferred, and this was back in 2000, so that's a long time ago. But we've like I said, I've got some battle scars from going through all this. But you have this 340-acre parcel that we had identified as a tremendous asset for reuse opportunities for our area, with those railroads coming in, and buildable land and no operations were ever on that piece of property, only to have the decision made that, oh no, that's not going to be an asset for you in the future, and so we no longer have that as an incentive for certain types of end users. So in that case, that particular case, that's frustrating, because the cleanup was not planned with the in-state vision of the community in mind. And if we were going to improve that going forward, from my perspective now as a village administrator, I just awarded a contract for a demolition project. So it's a D&D, but it's of our old high school. But in the RFP that the folks used to submit their proposals, we built the end use into that. And so I don't know if it's possible, but it seems like if the community's vision, whether you use the Crows plan or your Chamber of Commerce, whatever organization makes sense at your site, if that could be brought into the RFP process so that the contractors, people come in, especially Piketon, people that come in to work these jobs, they're driving 26 miles south to Portsmouth because the site's in Piketon. So like they just don't know. So if DOE could incorporate that information in the RFP stage, maybe where the contractor is bidding to that, we're gonna submit a proposal on how to do XYZ, and we're gonna do it this way because we have this piece of information in the RFP that tells us that this is what the end state's gonna look like in this location. So that's in my opinion, that would be one way to keep from those disconnects, keeping those disconnects from occurring going forward.
Okay.
Put it on the front end, the end state on the front end.
Okay. Ken, you may have a different perspective of things are going well at Oak Ridge, so any points quickly that you could make on what's gone right?
Yeah, on the yes/no piece, I'll go with yes for two reasons. One, I'm observing that to be the case. The client is doing all that it can from my point of view with regard to as it relates to reindustrialization and reuse. From the second point is that they are the customer, so I would never say no anyways, but it's truly grounded in yes. But all kidding aside, you know, I think it goes to Jennifer's point. I was very encouraged to see two things as it related to reuse, and one was that under the DOE program plan, priority area 3 is all focused on reusing land that's been cleaned up and putting it back in the hands, and that's a complex wide initiative. That isn't just Oak Ridge. The second piece is exactly what Jennifer said on the RFP piece of it is I'm very familiar with the Oak Ridge Reservation cleanup contract. I'm actually very honored that we've been selected to do that. And in the contract, if you go look at the scopes of work, they're called performance work statements. If you go in there, since it's an end state contract, it defines what the definition of end state is. And I can't think of a single performance work statement area that defines cleanup of a building or a parcel of land that doesn't have the word "and federal land reuse" in it, in the end state definition. So although I've always felt, you know, under our previous contract, we were contractually bounded to produce a reuse end state, it was really written as sort of a service obligation under the ETTP contract. Under the end state contract, the word reuse and in end state is synonymous for each of the performance work statements. So that even makes it tighter from my point of view, that when we're writing task orders, we're duty bound to the department to take it all the way to that end state and that reuse if they declare it to be the outcome of the end state. So I think we've made a lot of progress in contract space with regard to that, and I think relative to establishing it as a priority complex wide, no doubt the priority area 3, you know, Dave flashed it up earlier today, all 5 priorities. Priority areas 3 is all about land reuse and reindustrialization.
And we started with Diane, so we're going to end with Diane, and she had some excellent recommendations in her slide presentation that hopefully y'all all will review when they come out online, but anything to elaborate on those recommendations?
I would just say there's just been great comments from this entire workshop and from the panel today. And the bottom line from my perspective is this: it's about the hard stuff next, not just on the cleanup side, but on the communications and the connection side, understanding where our community wants to go, working together and collaborating together. And I think that we just need to remember that at the end of the day, it's about service to our people. And that's why we do what we do as local governments. It's for service of our people, our greatest asset. So we look forward again to working with our partners, all of our partners, and tribal, industry, community, stakeholder, DOE, stakeholder partners. But I do really echo both the good and the bad of the comments from my fellow panelists today, because I too have my battle scars. So thank you.
And can we thank the panel for their talk today? If you have individual, spontaneous, off the top of your head questions you'd like to get to the panel, so you can find them at the lunch. The lunch is next, so everybody enjoy your lunch. Thanks.